Carlton King, the former Scotland Yard Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of Black Ops.
Undercover for Special Branch in a jihadi organisation. My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy Podcast, the show that shines a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security, and armed governmental personal protection operations. But actually, what we really do in the round is look at the world of geopolitics. And in that world, we take the largest perspective and we go down to the smallest perspective. And the reason we do that is because we look at the real world. And what the real world does is it often tries to direct what we think by the powers that be orientating our feelings. So that would be from government, business, particular wealthy, very wealthy business people, inventors, entrepreneurs, etc. And when I say very wealthy, I'm talking about billionaires. And then we look at how the media in general orientates how we feel. And then there's governmental organisations, and in Britain you've got an establishment, and indeed practically in every country you've got this establishment that you call civil servants. But what I really want to look at how the media orientates our feelings, but not in the way that you might think. Today what I want to look at is the media in a specific arena, and that's what you could call the leisure media. So example, movies, television, radio programs, etc., etc. But I'm just going to concentrate on two things, because I'm often asked this by a lot of people. It's the movies, and it's cinema, etc. And it's now streaming, it's TV shows. And I'm often asked, what's realistic? What programs do I think are realistic as it relates to secret intelligence, national security? You know, such programs. What's the realism in it? And we're being fed this diet, but is it true? And, you know, what I guess I want to do really in order to look to that is I want to kind of recommend maybe five programs in the genre of police and, obviously more importantly, secret intelligence, national security, undercover operations, etc. All of which I've done, so I can speak with some knowledge about those type of activities within the police service. But you've also got to look and say, yeah, but a lot of these programs that we watch are overseas, you know, American example. So what I can do is I can say, yes, well, I work for the Americans, right, in the beginning of my career in law enforcement. I worked in looking at narcotics, as they would call it, drugs, in that field. So I understand that and how a section of the American law enforcement work, because we need to understand that there's like more than 22,000 different law enforcement organisations in the United States. Yeah, you heard me right, 22,000 in the United States. So, you know, all of them will have different ways, different practice, different way of working. Yes, there will be federal legislature over the top of it. So when I was working amongst the military, they had federal legislature, and they also had military legislature, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, example UCMJ. So you've always got bodies which oversee things for what you're doing in terms of law enforcement. Then what I want to do is also look at national security. So when I worked in national security, in the special branch, etc., you've got ways of dealing with things in terms of national security. You've got other angles that come on top of the criminal justice aspect, which are then being directed, whether they like it or not, whether they'll admit to it or not, by a higher echelon, by the national perspective of a state. And that means that you get the highest national bodies that look into what you're doing, and to be fair, in reality, that authorise what you're doing. So that's the government authorising your activities. Senior government, most senior government ministers authorising your activities because it's something that's at the national level. So in terms of that, you're looking at counter-terrorism, counter-espionage, counter-proliferation to some extent, and you're also looking at counter-subversion, etc., etc. Counter, and one of the big ones that they very rarely talk about because it's quite sensitive, is countering, if you will, extremism. So it hasn't reached the level of terrorism because they're not necessarily blowing things up. That doesn't mean to say that they're not orientating other people to do things who may or may not take it that step further, which is what happens with most of these organisations who are extremists. They just want to put the whistle in and then they want somebody else to blow the whistle for them. And so they can often say, oh, it's not me, Governor. They decide to take it that far. So countering subversion, in terms of trying to overthrow the state. So the organisation puts something in place and then hopefully some of their followers take it further to try and overthrow the state, which may lead to rebellion, may lead to other practices which are designed to undermine the state, to create the rebellion to come, to create revolution, etc. Or just to create fizzes in society that society in general will lead then to revolution. So these are not simplistic models. These are difficult models, and oftentimes the state accepts that they're difficult models but doesn't want to do anything about it because it's all too difficult in the open. So they have the secret state, the secret police, the secret organisations to try and aid and assist to defeat that. But then when it comes on top, for whatever reason, they want to disavow what they have put in place. So you get that. And so how do movies deal with that issue? And then, of course, there's the other side, which I've also done, which is then espionage, where you are the person involving yourself in espionage, counter-terrorism overseas, forming espionage overseas in other countries, trying to gain intelligence on other countries overseas, which is obviously a criminal offence in the other person's country, and therefore you are an outlaw sanctioned by your country, by the state, to do what you can in order to get the information that the state, the country wants, that the government wants, and you're doing that on behalf of the state. So again, movies that look at this. So I'm happy to go into some of the movies and look at it and go through those sort of three wide-ish areas and just explains the one that I think are pretty good and the ones that I'd say are not. I'll look at contemporary stuff and I'll look at some stuff going back in time just to say the big difference. And I think I'm also going to look to why I think there is a difference from what you might have been fed 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago to what you're fed now, today. So, ladies and gentlemen, buckle up, hold tight, and enjoy time at the movies, the TV, etc. I'll do this one by myself and not with the throuple, purely and simply because we may do something like this with the throuple, but on less technical aspects, more sort of generally open. Now I'm going to go a little bit deeper by myself using my expertise, so you can get a feel on this one. So let's look at number one. Let's look at contemporary. Well, right now we've got a programme that is on television. It's about the explosives officer in the Met, and it's really about how that works within the Metropolitan Police. Well, first and foremost, what I'll say to you is it's totally fictional. There's probably not one part of the programme that, to my mind, is... And I put my hands up, I watched first bits of it and then thought, no, this is silly. even down to the level of, and I think I mentioned this last week because it just kind of came up, even down to the level of, if you're going to be an explosive ordnance guy, and you're going to, and for guy, gal, and what you're going to do, but the vast majority of guys, you're going to walk up to an explosive. Some might argue the worst type of explosive is an improvised explosive device, and you're going to walk up to that, and you've got it on your wits and on your partner's wits, who is behind the scene. They've togged you up in your clothing and everything, and then you walk towards it, and then you deal with the ordnance itself. The last thing you are, and this is no disrespect to Vicky McClure, because I know she has got to try and make it exciting, etc. And Vicky had promised to come on the show at one stage. Haven't had her on yet, but the offer is still open, Vicky. But no disrespect to Vicky McClure, because she's playing a part that's probably been fed her. The last thing you are is, as she said on one episode, I take chances, that's my job. Well, any EOD that I've spoken to quite a few, be it here in Britain in the Met, etc., and be it abroad in Afghanistan, Iraq, actually in other places as well, so in Congo and whatever. And the last thing that these people do is take chances. That they say, we're not taking chances, we are actually being calculated in what we do. The other thing that she showed on the programme was a great excitement. So, get out of here, all that shouting type of stuff, which I guess, fair enough. I guess that's televisual. I guess it's impactful on the audience, but it's not something that these people do. And I'm going to leave that there. I'm not going to go into it much more. I'm just going to leave that there so you understand that. And then I'm going to come to a programme called Bodyguard, which I was asked to review by The Telegraph. So if you're really interested in knowing my full review, you can look at that review. It's a couple of years back now. I think it's back in about 2019, 21, something like that. 2020, 2019 to 21, something around that era. It might be early because time does fly, and the older you get, the quicker the time seems to fly. But I was asked to review that by The Telegraph before the programme came out. So I saw the rushes, I saw the programme in advance, and frankly, my view was that it's way over the top. Once again, it did not show, and take into account that I was doing protection for years. It's set in Great Britain, so the body that carries out protection of politicians in Great Britain and visiting politicians, presidents, prime ministers, foreign secretaries, whomever that might be, and our own prime minister, foreign secretary, blah, 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 whatever. The body that did that was the Metropolitan Police Special Branch, and just the Met Special Branch, not any other special branch. And then subsequently, when the Special Branch was disbanded, SO1 Specialist Protection. Now, I worked on protection within the Special Branch when I was at a young DC. Then I did many other things within the branch. And then later on, I came and worked within, again, the protection section was called A Squad for a while, and then unfortunately the branch was disbanded, and I was one of the creators of the new body, which I didn't want to create because I thought the branch was ideal for it, all joined up with all aspects of political policing put in one place. But when the higher-ups decided, the commissioner, etc., that the special branch was to be disbanded, then I was one of the people who created the new body, SO1 Specialist Protection, and put in various specialist areas that you deal with. So I absolutely know what I'm talking about. I ran the office for a year or so that provided protections to all people, be they the ones who receive it in the country, from the Prime Minister down, and the few, not many, and also for the visitors who came to the countries, to our country, be they the president from an African state, from a European state, from an Asian state, be it China, be it Russia, be it the United States. Whomever came to the country, we carried out that protection for them. So I know what I'm talking about in this vein. That programme, Bodyguard, was absolutely silly in many, many veins. And once again, it seems to be that there's this idea of all-encompassing. But they say all-encompassing, and then they don't really understand how wide a breadth this is. You had a fellow trying to find out some information or something, and he was looking at press cuttings. Well, SO1 is still connected to what now is SO15, and then connected their ISO 15 to the security service. So if you want to find information, you've got a vast amount of files. Plus it has its own files from the special branch days on individuals, so you can see those files. And they're all secret files set up for the system. It's not looking at the press. So please, you understand the bodies you're dealing with. But oftentimes, people who create these things don't understand the organisation. They have an overview that what they think is right, and then they say, so again, that was another programme. And then, of course, you had him doing other things that had nothing to do with protection. So, and then doing protection in a silly way, looking in the Home Secretary's drawers, and I mean the drawers in a chest of drawers, for what? What is the guy looking for? The area is secured by uniformed police. Why are you going in her room looking for something in her house when uniformed police are securing that area anyway? And if it is such that somebody's been able to get inside and set some explosive or whatever he's looking for, explosive was what it was meant to be, then frankly, you ain't going to find it by just opening a couple of drawers and saying, now you can come in. Nonsense, total and utter nonsense. So this is what you get. You get people who create things with no real aspect of reality to it. So again, nonsense. So over the top. And this is what I seem to be coming to the theme of, that the newer stuff becomes much more over the top than what it was in the past. So let me jump back and tell you some stuff that I think was good. So if you go back into the 70s, they had a programme on British television called Special Branch. And it did, I was just thinking for 1 second, did it begin in the 60s? No, it began in the 70s, had several series of it, and frankly, it was a very good programme. It was John Sewell, is it? Haggerty and, I forgot the name of the other guy who played the two DIs in it. And, okay, so they may have skewed some bits of it, like you always do. The relationship with the security service from the Special Branch was actually too supplicant. The Special Branch officers were too supplicant towards the security service in general. But other than that, actually the programme was pretty good, wasn't over the top, carried out all aspects of Special Branch work, even explained why, within the script, and did it well, why a certain officer was doing this type, DI was doing this type of work to his girlfriend, how he was different than regular policing, because the girlfriend was quite wealthy, so father knew something and she'd mentioned something and he had to explain an element of it. So that was quite interesting. Showed him writing reports, which you have to do. Paperwork has to be done. I don't care how you do it. Intelligence reports are important. So that was done, and how it connected and how the whole of the branch connected. It also showed different aspects of the branch's work, be it homegrown extremism, be it revolutionary politics, be it extreme right-wing politics, be it dealing with the IRA, which was the bread and butter of MPSB of Scotland Yard Special Branch. It had the national responsibility for dealing with the IRA and IRA activity. So it showed that. It showed overseas espionage and dealing with that aspect in conjunction with security service, but how the branch actually did most of the work. And definitely when it came into the orbit of anything criminal, then obviously police, Special Branch dealt with that issue in conjunction with the counter-terrorism branch, anti-terrorist branch of those days, used to call it. So it was an extremely good, well-seen, well-rounded programme, not over the top. Did some undercover work that it showed the branch was doing. It was actually a superb programme showing the politics of the day and why the branch was involved in this secret police organisation, for want of a better word, in the United Kingdom, why it was dealing with political policing in the round, all of it, from protection all the way through to countering espionage, countering proliferation, etc., etc. And that's nuclear proliferation. So, yeah, brilliant, well done. The other one now in a general police mode, just general everyday police mode, general CID work, but Actually, a little bit more than that, because it was talking about the flying squad, which is in the Met, was a body of detectives dealing with armed and violent robberies and crimes, bank robberies, etc. Was the Sweeney. Again, another superbly put together programme. Very realistic in how the Sweeney worked. Extremely realistic. I believe they got a lot of their plots directly from people within the flying squad who were saying, this is how we work. And if something new came up, I believe that the two primary actors were getting information that said, yeah, hey, listen, this is how we've done this op recently. You might want to put this in your programme because this is how it worked. So giving you a feel as to how things were and how different parts of the service, the police service, worked, and what the flying squad's position was within that greater body. Not just that they could do everything they wanted, but how they did have a little bit more power. Same with Special Branch. In that Special Branch program, it showed you that the branch, frankly, in those days, had a hell of a lot of power to do what they needed to do because of the secrecy and sensitivity of what they were dealing with. While with the flying squad, they had a lot of power to do what they needed to do because of the type of crimes they were dealing with and how they dealt with them, which was armed robbery. So it's quite interesting that both those programs in the 70s were sensible, but still provided action, still provided things that the viewers could look to and get excited in every day, and still had, as far as the Sweeney was concerned, car chases, etc. All the things that went actually with the job that was being performed. So again, another superb program. And just before that I'd not only dealing with specialist organisations that I thought were good. Let's take you back to the 60s and 70s. Programmes like Dixon of Dock Green. And I've spoken with many a police officer and I'm talking regular police now, uniformed police officers, who looked at that programme and said, yeah, that's pretty much about right. They maybe missed out on some of the more handsy stuff. But that's about right. And then again, I've spoken with people up north who dealt with policing and said Z-Cars was about right. Again, maybe missed out a little bit of the handsy stuff, but Z-Cars was about right. So what I'm saying is, in the 70s, there actually seemed to be some really good UK-centric, UK-orientated police programmes which were generally realistic. They weren't over the top. They didn't have a gimmick like, say, Vera or something like that. That they had to work to the gimmick that then set the whole programme in a vein that wasn't realistic. Excellent programmes. So now you're going to say, okay, you're an old guy and you're looking at the old stuff and you're saying everything was better in the old stuff. Okay, so what I will say is that people who regularly listen know that I've probably worked with police, intelligence, security agencies from probably about 3/4 of the world. So I had some experience in how much of the world functions in terms of police and intelligence, etc. And so let me put some newer stuff in that's very good. So there's one that talks about Delhi police in India. And from what I saw in my times in India, when I'm working with them, that is pretty much spot on, albeit I wasn't working in the general policing environment. But you could see how policing worked there. So the times that I went there, I can tell you that and the way it functioned and the modern functionality, because these are modern programs, was actually very, very good. So to be fair, that's good program to look at. I'm not going into documentaries. I'll do that another time because documentaries then show you in a different way. I'm talking about now. These are, if you will, formatted fictional process, but were very good. So that Delhi Police, very, very good. If you get to look at it, very, very good. Some of the German stuff has always been quite good. Yes, take away, and I worked in Germany for quite some time, take away some of the more Holmesy element to it. But generally, they don't go over the top on how they function. They generally function within what the policing parameters are. So in Germany, you've got, as in most of Europe, you've got an investigating magistrate who effectively runs the cases. And the police do the investigation, but they go to the investigating magistrate in Germany. That's called the Staatsanwalt, and that the Staatsanwaltschaft, they're giving them information about what they need to cover, what they will allow, what they won't allow, etc., etc. Generally, the Germans put that together quite well. There was something on the BBC called the Black Forest murder, Schwarzwald murder, that was actually very good. Yeah, bits and baps about it, which, you know, you can question in terms of questioning individuals, etc., etc. But the way they did with the Kripo, which is the criminal police, the CID, the way they were dealing with that, and the way that the German police deal with it, which I don't think is as good as ours, in fact, when you're looking at murders, with the British police and the numbers we bring together to look at murders, and the technical capacity we have to look at murders in Great Britain, actually is very good. This is why I say I'm not going into documentaries, because this is what astounds me. Why do they make the programme so silly in the United Kingdom when actually there's a whole host of good documentaries they put on that show you the width and breadth of investigative techniques in Britain and how they're done. So, to give you one example of it, yes, in the 1970s, Jack Regan, as the inspector, may or may not have started questioning somebody who he felt was responsible for an offence, right? No inspector, no detective inspector is doing that today. You have individuals who are trained, generally detective constables, or sometimes even just constables, not detectives, sometimes not even people who have the sworn-in police, depending on some forces, the sworn-in police process, but are known as interview officers who actually carry out the interviews and do the technical carrying out of the interview in an interview room, right? And again, it's very, very rare that you're interviewing somebody in the interview room without some sort of legal assistance. Very rare. So, you know, when you see all these programs, you've got one-on-one and they're facing each other and there's all this anger shown. Look, nobody's doing that, and it's not the detective inspector doing it, or the detective chief inspector or the superintendent. They've got too much to do. They're running the operation. They're the senior investigating officer. They are not sitting in a room questioning people. That's not the way it works. You know, things have changed. But that's what they want to show. Now, I only bring this up because in some of the German programs, you'll see that the person doing the interrogation sometimes, or investigative technique sometimes, is the senior officer dealing, or the officers who've got the case, who are generally commissars, which, yeah, I suppose you loosely can say as an inspector, but you can't really use that because you come in at a higher rank at CID in Germany. So a commissar, so really it should be going up, Oberkommissar, whatever, might be more of an inspector in the German system. So 2 or 3 ranks up from the regular commissar. But if you look for a translation, commissar would be inspector. But it's not that in terms of how the ranks are dealt with in Britain, to be fair. Within the CID, because it's generally a separate body, the CID, except for in Hamburg, where it's oftentimes part of the general police. So so the thing is that what I'm saying is they do that well with some exceptions, but some of the exceptions I can deal with because some of them are true because of how officers get a case. Like in many of the American states, an officer is given a case, and that officer, that detective, which is in itself a rank in the United States, that detective deals with that case going through, even though that detective is relatively senior maybe, right, deals with that case going through, and therefore he's doing questioning as well. And the numbers that they apply to an investigation in many of the smaller forces, I'm talking this 22,000, are nowhere near the numbers which will be applied to a murder, nowhere near the capacity that will be applied to a murder in the United Kingdom, nowhere near as good as what you would have in the United Kingdom, nowhere near. So that's the big differences there. So you've got to aim off for that. But this is where the problem lies. Because they watch the American programs, these directors and these writers, etc., who know nothing about police, they then say, oh, that's how the British police must work. So we'll have our inspector doing interviews. We'll have our inspector running every part of the case. We'll have our inspector out on the street doing the general legwork, which generally, in our case, our inspector, yes, he may or she may go out on the street to see how the op's going, but generally what's happened is they're putting people out on the street because there's many, many people working a murder. And it's all coming together, and they are basically like a manager of a process in addition to being an investigator. So they will hopefully see where things are going wrong and say, we need to plug that. So you go out and look at that as part of the investigation. Bring the team all together. Right, I want you to look at this, you to look at that, you to look at compute, you to look at this. There's a whole host. It's a massive, big operation. So, but they look at it like it's an American one where there's two men and a dog dealing with it, him and his partner, and they go on and they solve the crime, a la Vera. Right? That's not how it really works. So that's what I'm saying. So that's where they've lost reality now. Now, yes, Jack Regan was a detective inspector, but in a different era when there were many more ranks in terms of the higher rank doing jobs that now the lower, frankly, a DC would now do. A DI was doing in those days, in addition to the DC, obviously, in addition to him orientating and organising the DC in many ways. So you may have had Jack Regan, in reality, in the 70s, questioning an individual. And of course, there weren't the restrictions on questioning in the old days that there are restrictions on questioning people now. There was no such thing as the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, where you had to deal with people in a certain way and have legal representation there and hold people for only a short period of time. Jack Regan's holding people for 4 or 5 days. You cannot do that today unless you get judges, etc., etc., etc. Right? So this is the difference. So to make this all more sexy, people have this incorrect. Then the other thing that they tend to do now today is there's corruption everywhere. Now, this is a whole host of nonsense. So these programs, and I know they're popular, where there's corruption in the police, and there's a whole program genre that's gone on forever and a day that people like, where it's investigating police corruption. And when I say corruption, I'm not talking about the piddling things that they deal with now and sack people for not having a tax license or whatever it might be. I'm talking about real corruption, right? That is not an everyday occurrence by far. It just isn't. It's just not. And the problem is that these programs put out that it is, that every officer's got some other thing that he's doing or she's doing, generally a he, by the way, because that's the way they set the program up, that they're doing something wrong. And that person, that person's going to be, they're undermining the operation because they're getting a payoff from somewhere, blah, blah, blah. That's undermining actually the police in general. Because the public look at these things, and this is why I'm doing this program, the public look at these things and think they're real. They've got nothing to gauge it against. So they think, all right, they're all corrupt. They're all on the take because the programme I watch tells me that they are. And again, not getting at you, Vicky McClure, but, Vicky McClure's in the programme. And everybody's a corrupt person. That's not the way it works. It's few and far between. So Robert Peel said the people are the police and the police are the people. That was his argument for it. Well, within that role, there are some people, as normal people, who will be corrupted or corrupted, whatever that might be. But as a general rule, no, that's not it. It's way over the top. The incidence is way over the top. Now, if you're talking about people doing things not as per the book, that's obviously a greater number. But again, it's nothing like in the 60s, 70s, maybe even early 80s and 90s. It's just not there. Why? Because people know that, number one, the society is bred in a different way. So let's take a racism, sexism. The society was different, and the police are the people, and the people are the police, reflecting that society at that time. It wasn't a big deal to call somebody an N-word at that time. Believe me, I know. You could walk the streets and people would call you the N-word. Now, as the person, the black person, you had to decide whether to fight that person or not. But that's where we were. It was normal every day. It is not normal every day now. It's becoming more prevalent now, again, for sure. But it wasn't normal every day. And this gets me into that Nigel Farage question that's presently abroad, and I'm not a fan of him in any way, shape or means, but I tell you, having been in a school of 1,500 odd people and being a black person within that, the only black person within that, I'll tell you that practically every school person was saying something that today you would look at and say that's unacceptable. Practically every school kid said something. The only reason they didn't is when you trained yourself up and became fit enough and strong enough and powerful enough to defend your position, where they thought you might get a good hiding for saying something. That's when things settle down. But the reality is that every person nigh on, and I do mean every person nigh on, would at least laugh into everybody else's jokes, at least involve himself. When one person said it, they'd say it as well. Now, whether Farage was the fellow who was the leader of that process, I don't know. If that's the case, fair enough. But I'm telling you, practically everybody else in the class will join in because they don't want to be the one that's fallen out. Now, it might be a little bit different when you're talking about Jewish people because the sensitivities in terms of that were much greater about saying negative things than it was about black people or whatever. I can remember when people were dying like flies in Biafra, and I literally mean like flies from starvation. I can remember there were a massive amount of jokes about dying Biafrans. Not one single teacher or anybody else said anything about it. And those jokes are every day, everywhere, all within the classroom. Again, when you look at the situation you had in Somalia at one stage where people were starving to death, again, there was a massive amount of jokes, which was said to you, obviously, as the individual, and teachers was potentially, I don't know, I'm not a teacher, were potentially saying it to the jokes within themselves, but everybody thought that was funny, and those would have been made normal. So that's what I'm saying. But then these programs, these police programs, often reflected that in the 70s. So that's where the difference might be. They reflected that. But all they were doing, and let's get it right, was reflecting the British society at the time. Indeed, it was well known, and it's written by his physician, his private physician, that Sir Winston Churchill often used to use derogatory language. He'd use the N-word or other words. He'd use words that South Africans would use for blacks. He'd use that in regular parlance with his people. Now, he didn't necessarily always use those words when talking to the public in general, so at, say, on the BBC or something. But in talking everyday parlance to his cabinet, he would be using that language. And that's written down by not just one person, several people have stated that. So what I'm saying to you is, and the reason why I bring Winston Churchill up is, if the Prime Minister in the 60s is using that language, 40s, 50s and 60s, at some time that he ran through, and others are using that language, why would it be so extreme that everyday people use that language? Right? So that's what I'm saying. So they reflected that in the language, these programs. So they were often very, very realistic. Okay, cinema. Before I spoke about an EOD, well, let's look at Catherine Bigelow and look at her film, The Hurt Locker. Actually, so there's drama around it. But again, I worked a lot with the US forces. As I said, I was a detective for them. And I worked with them in Iraq and Afghanistan, etc., spoke with EODs because of when I was bringing protection bodies in there. I needed some EODs available, and when British EODs weren't there, I spoke with American EODs. I understood how they functioned, etc., etc. I used all the time American helicopters, American tanks, American armoured vehicles, American Humvees. I used the American forces a lot, and so therefore I had good connections with the Americans. And that Hurt Locker actually, and worked with American Special Forces, that actually, and military police, pretty much did a good job of showing what that was like for those type of people. So again, notice that I'm not telling you about the actual program because I don't want to spoil somebody watching it I want you to go and watch them yourself. But I'd say that's a pretty good representation. While I'm on Kathleen Bigelow, because I think she's very, very good, I was dealing in other roles with dealing with combating terrorism worldwide for Secret Intelligence Agency of the United Kingdom, and worked very closely with American colleagues. And if you look at Zero Dark 30, very good again, because that shows you the connection of how the Central Intelligence Agency, partner organisation to us in the United Kingdom, the US partner organisation to us in the United Kingdom, how that functioned, how the researchers worked, massive part of the counter-terrorism section of the US, massive part of that CIA operation, and very familiar with how that functioned. And again, I say she was pretty much spot on with how she did that. Very, very good about how that's done. So I think Kathleen Bigelow's pretty good at kind of getting the drama out, but again, making it realistic. Very, very good. And if you want to watch another programme of hers, which I think is very good, on another issue that I'm less up to date with, but do know or did know American colleagues in these particular areas, and therefore get a feel as to how I think it's about correct, but I can't say because it's not my area of expertise, is the House of Dynamite. What I can say is the continuity planning process of that I was involved in the United Kingdom, about what we would do, because as I said to you before, we protected the Prime Minister down, so how we would do that, that's continuity planning if it all went really wrong. And I was involved in that process, and my office did that when I was there. So I can tell you that from our perspective, not that we were Americans and had all the capabilities that the American have, but just the continuity plan and how that kind of worked and the decisions, that looked pretty much spot on this. I'll not tell you anything about it, I'll just say watch it. Very, very good. So that's House of Dynamite. Another one which I'm going to give some good pointers to, a good old British one, is Going Back in Time, and it's called The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. I think that is a very, very, very good programme. Movie, yeah. If you haven't seen it, for the era, look at it. Again, won't spoil it if you haven't seen it, because a lot of people listening to this are going to be relatively young and haven't seen that movie. It's going way back into the 60s. It's about the Secret Intelligence Service, or MI6, and it's about how an officer is dealing with issues there. And it's Richard Burton, who's a star role, great actor, by the way, and it's how he deals with this whole thing. But it's how they put all that together, not over the top, sensible actions inside of, going abroad into East Germany, etc. Just watch the movie. Very good movie. Yeah, and again, look, it's a movie, it's not a documentary, so there are going to be aspects to it that come in play, but actually, most of it is pretty much spot on as to the process. Now, you may mix up two things. You may mix up the work of security service stroke special branch. Maybe some aspects of the homegrown stuff that he does might have fallen more towards security service special branch in the UK, but definitely external stuff is them. But of course, that's not necessarily the case, because there were joint sections where you could have an SIS officer doing some stuff internally as well as externally. So you still do. So that's the reality. So not very good program. Very good movie. So if you ever have the opportunity to watch that movie, watch that movie. I'm saying that as I'm thinking, because I'm trying to give people plaudits where they belong. And one of the plaudits I'll give, if you've never seen it, you must watch it. It's called The Wire. We're going to the United States for this one. Very, very good. Spoken to many a US law enforcement officer from different areas. I've even spoken to people from Baltimore, okay, where it's set, and they say The Wire pretty much is spot on. How it's set up, how it's done. This is where Idris Elba became famous from. He played a great part of Stringer Bell. Really, look at that. Look at the politics of it, which are the most exciting and interesting things. The politics of it are interesting. Now, this is where the problem lies. Obviously, there's a lot of murders involved in that. Now, this is where we find our problem. In Baltimore, in the era that that's written, I think the murder rate per year was around 5 to 6 to 700 people, right? Just in Baltimore, city of, I think it's about 1.5 million people, right? So the murder rate was massive, right? So you do get a lot of murders, especially in the poorer areas, and especially looking at narcotics. So you don't get that many murders in. I think it's about 500 actually. But 500. Let's not go over the top. I think it's about 500. That's around about the figures for the whole of the United Kingdom. 525, 530, 550 for the whole of the United Kingdom. You know, a nation of 70 million people: England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland. Right. So when you're looking at murders, you could get just as many murders in Baltimore as you could in the whole of a 70 million nation. So yes, you can have police actions going on with people being killed every 2 minutes, which is what I was going to say, which is what people like. Well, I don't know if it's what people like or if it's what the creators and writers and directors think it's what people like. So following that, you become unrealistic for the United Kingdom. And that's what I think, as a general rule, and again, I've got to say that the Germans don't tend to fall into. They don't tend to fall into following how the United States do it. And I'll hit onto something else. We, as a general rule in the United Kingdom, although throughout my career I carried a firearm in a gun in various areas of special branch work. I carried a gun practically from the time I went there to the time I finished. But that's absolutely abnormal for the United Kingdom. Totally and utterly abnormal. Whereas it's totally normal for the United States. So you've got to understand that, the big difference. It's totally normal for Germany. It's totally normal for the Republic of Ireland. For Northern Ireland. You know, these are things that are totally normal as opposed to things that are totally abnormal in England, Scotland, and Wales. Right? Totally abnormal. So if you looked at the Metropolitan Police, you'd say, I'd say 96% of officers in the Met, between 94 and 96% of officers in the Met, never hold a weapon, never carry a gun, never see it. And if you go to other forces, it might be as high as 98 within England, and Wales. So this is where you are. Some forces have now got traffic people carrying, etc., which is interesting and good. You know, I find nothing wrong with that. It's totally correct. But what I'm saying is when you make your programs then, and you have people every 2 seconds drawing weapons and all this, it's rubbish. It takes away from the program straight away. Because even as somebody who's carrying day in, day out, yeah, you are loath to draw that weapon. Because you know you're going to have to report it, and you know 9 times out of 10, if you did, you're going to be in stuck. Because it's not what you think. It's the opposite. You know, one of my colleagues' example shot an individual, it's going back some, who was an assassin from a terrorist organisation who shot the Israeli ambassador. And that Israeli ambassador was then, he thought he was dead at the time, but then left his life as a paraplegic. So, and the protection officer in Special Branch, in Scotland Yard Special Branch, who carries out protections, shot the guy who shot him, and that officer was put on trial. Just because the guy who had pointed his weapon at, I'm not going to say names, he pointed his weapon at the ambassador and shot him, and the officer saw this. So the Special Branch officer, the SB officer, drew his weapon to try and combat that, but it's all a split second because the other fellow was already there waiting. The assassin's already waiting. He's got the advantage. He knows what's going to happen. He's got the advantage. He shot the ambassador and then turned his weapon on the Special Branch officer. And luckily for the Special Branch officer, that weapon jammed. It was a Scorpion, which often jammed. High rate, small, very small weapon, machine gun, but had a tendency to jam. It was a Czechoslovakian in those days made weapon. Not saying it was bad or anything, it wasn't. It's just that with the high rate of fire and the small size of it, it used to jam often. So this guy then starts a procedure which basically is to unjam the blockage. So an anti-blocking procedure. As he's running away, the officer tells people to look after the ambassador and get an ambulance, blah, blah, blah. And he follows this guy who's still a danger to everybody else, runs after him. And this guy, whilst he's trying to right his weapon, he's doing that, trying to clear the blockage. As he turns on the SP officer, fired one round. Great shot from many miles away, moving, running, put the fella down. One shot, that's all he did. Put him down, bosh, and then held him there, struggling with him, held him there until the other police came, some distance away from the original shooting area, till the other police came, and then ambulance came. That officer was put on trial and had to explain why he shot somebody running away, why he shot a defenceless man. This is how the defence put it. Why the prosecution put it. Why are you shooting a defenceless man who's got his back to you and running away? What danger is he to you? Well, you know, he's a danger to the rest of the public because he's a terrorist and he's trying to clear his weapon, right? And secondly, the fella had turned on the officer. He'd already tried to shoot him once and just didn't shoot him because it jammed. When he turned on him, what's that supposed meant to do? Wait? No, so he shot him once. And he shot him once only. Didn't put 15... Well, he didn't, that's it, because a Model 36 in those days used to carry. So he didn't put 6 rounds in him. He shot him once, right? Put him down and then dealt with him. So the reality is that all these programs you see whereby police are shooting people left, right and centre, it's nonsense. Because any firearms officer in the United Kingdom, that goes for protection officers, they're classed as firearms officers in the same way. Any firearms officer knows you shoot somebody, you're put on trial. They will try and put you on trial no matter what. If they have 4 and 5 different attempts at trying to put you on trial, they will put you on trial. They'll try and get you put on trial, regardless of what the circumstances. So you know the very last thing you're doing is brandishing a weapon around, pulling your weapon out, all this nonsense. This is again where it goes over the top, but it gives the public a view of firearms officers that's incorrect. So when something does happen, an officer has to revert or orientate himself towards lethal force, or herself, right, towards lethal force. And this nonsense of shooting to kill and all this sort of rubbish. And what they often say is, well, couldn't you shoot him in his hand? This is not cowboy stuff, which is unreal. This is reality. You shoot for centre mass, for the heart, the biggest part of the body, because that makes sure that you hit something. Because you imagine the tensions that are all in play. You imagine the movements that are all in play. So you're shooting at centre mass, and centre mass is what you're trying to hit, and you're shooting to put the individual down. You're not shooting to kill the individual, which is, they'll talk about shoot to kill. You're not shooting to kill, and I'm doing inverted commas, you're not doing shoot to kill, you're shooting to stop the individual from causing a threat to you and or to others. You know, lethal threat to you and or to others. Right? That's what you're trying to do. If you have to, orientate yourself to that final decision, that's what you have to do. And, the other thing is that because there are so few firearms officers, the likelihood is that more people will be involved in the same type of incident all the time. So when they say, oh, this officer has been involved in X amount of incidents or shootings, of course he has. Why? Because he's one of extremely few. I've told you the figures. If I tell you that 96% of officers do not carry, when you need somebody with a firearm, because criminals do carry. This is the juxtaposition as well, which I'll go into. When you have an unarmed police, criminals carry firearms. Why? Because it helps them get away from the crime. And every criminal wants to get away from the crime. It also, if he's doing things like a bank robbery or something like that, then if you don't have a weapon, particularly a firearm, a gun, right, with all the safety features they have with armoured glass, etc., the person's not going to give you anything behind the armoured glass. So you use a weapon in order to get what you need to allow you to carry out the crime. So it's a tool of the job, if you will. So that's the way it works. So yeah, that's another part. The use of firearms in these programs by police is often nonsense, total nonsense. because they're following the American, who does utilise their weapons all the time. That's the big difference. They do. It's a regular occurrence in the United States, as a general rule. Now, not as irregular as they make it, but it's regularly regular because they do draw their weapons often. It's just one of the things. It's how you're taught, to be fair, to have your hand on your weapon and get ready to draw it all the time in the American scenario, in the training that you get. So that's just one of those things. Yeah, so looking at that, I'd given you 3 recommendations. Another one that I'd recommend quite recently. Very, very good program, because I haven't really touched on undercover type of stuff. So one is The Asset. Not set in the United Kingdom, set in Denmark, where I have worked. Very, very good. Not going to tell you what it's about. Don't want to spoil it for you. But again, the way that that's done, the way they recruit the individual, the way they take them, yeah, all of that's pretty much good. There might be some bits and baps about it that you can question because, again, it's a drama. But a lot of it is good. Done well, done sensibly, done within the realms of reality. Not over the top. As a general rule, bits and baps like always any movie it's not a documentary. I'll say this all the time. So I'm not too harsh on things that have some element of sensibility to them because they're not documentaries. So The Asset, Danish, very, very good, excellent. And again, one that I would say going, what's he called? Sophie, the Killings, going way back now, was very, very good. Norwegian, wasn't it? And it's the thing that set up the Scandinavian noir, which everybody wanted to follow. That was a very good. The Americans did an American version, okay, but not as good. Yeah, that was good. Generally sensible. Yeah, there are bits in the politics which could be over the top, but yeah, generally good. So I'm recommending these programs that I look at and think, yeah, that's generally quite good. Another one which I'll mention is that I found very, very good. It's another foreign program. Is Bureau des Étrangers, which is, they've now basically got it. It's called The Agency. So it looks at the CIA on the American version. They've taken it, like The Killings. The Americans did a version of The Killings, and they've also done a version of this one, this French show, which is a very, very good show. And it's about a CIA undercover. The American one, the French one, is so I've worked with the CIA often, and I've worked with the DGSE, which is a French version of overseas agency, intelligence agency, so secret intelligence agency. It's the sister of the CIA, the sister of MI6, sister organisations to them, and it's about a chap going under for a period of time, quite a period of time, in a foreign country. I'm not going to tell you about it because I don't want to spoil it, but it's superbly done. They do it very, very well. There is no doubt about that. You know, at least in the beginning, I think it's 4 seasons, at least in the beginning 2, maybe 3 seasons. There's nothing about it that's in any way, shape or means silly. You could say it expands a little bit in season 3 or 4, but again, it's still not over the top. It's really very, very good. If you have the opportunity to see it, it's good. The American version, The Agency, yeah, Fassbinder plays a primary role. Not bad. Again, you know, the hail glory of the American stuff added to it. You know, not as good as the French by any means, but it's a copy from the French version. But it's nowhere near as good as the French version. But it is good. I'm not going to call The Agency down fully. It does have something going for it. And it's set in the United Kingdom, The Agency, albeit that it's the CIA. So that's that's an interesting program. Yeah, not bad program at all. Worth the watch. Another one going back in time. That was worth the watch, looking more at narcotics, and I'll do quite a quick few of narcotics going forward, drugs, before I bring the programme to an end. So these would be, and I did some work in the kind of narcotics field, looking at, in the old days, Pablo Escobar, and in those days we were talking about narco-terrorism of Colombia, so that's why we were interested in it in Special Branch, rather than it just being, and then protection, obviously, of the president-elect of Colombia. And if you read my book, Black Ops, the incredible true story of a British secret agent, you will see there's a section in there I talk about this aspect, about Pablo Escobar and then the coming of the president-elect to the United Kingdom. So, as I said, if you want to read and understand where I'm coming from, just read the book, and you'll understand from my book why I'm saying these things and why I think this is realistic and that's realistic. So I had something to do with the narcotics thing, not because the narcotics, albeit that when I worked for the Americans, I had a lot to do with the narcotics, because the American military was full of it in those days, shortly after Vietnam. So, yeah, I always had that in the background, but I wasn't specifically just dealing with narcotics. But I was dealing with Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel, based on the fact that it was subverting the state of Colombia, right? So interestingly enough, on that issue, as I said, you can look at something called, it's a Canadian program, and it's called Intelligence. And basically what it's looking at, it's actually in the conversion period between the RCMPs, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who, we dealt a lot with in the old days because, colonial ties, etc., and that they were police, so we in Special Branch dealt a lot with, where it was changing over to the Canadian Security Intelligence Organisation, that took some of the intelligence aspect, particularly on secret intelligence, which we were dealing with in Special Branch. It took it over from the RCMP, from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So it's in that period where it's changing. So part of that is narcotics that they're dealing with. So in the 90s, everybody's looking at narcotics because Cold War kind of ended and narcotics were still sat there. Drugs were still sat there. So it's the crossover period. So there's the politics of policing, the politics of intelligence movement, and then there's the actual drugs. It's a superb program, well worth looking at. It's set in an area that I'd been to as well in Canada, and worked with the locals and the RCMP and the local police there in that area when I'm doing another operation. So it's great. It's great to. It's a good program. So if you get the opportunity, yes, do watch that. And so quick fire hits on quite a few just coming forward on the narcotics. Obviously, because you probably will have seen them. Obviously, any of the narcos, very good. Narcos in Colombia, talking about Medellin, etc. Any of the narcos Mexico, because those programs are basically cited in real facts, in actually what happened. So they are very good. Another one, 000, superb. If you want to see the trade and the movement of the drugs trade from Italy across through down into Colombia, Peru, etc., coming around into West Africa, Bosch, back up into Europe, that is a great program. Into Mexico, good program. Puts it together well, orientated well, shows the worldwide nature of the narcotics. If you've got nothing else to do, watch that. The only negative to that program, 000, is that they only made one season of it. It's the same guy, Italian, who made the Gomorrah. That Gomorrah program, which is only in Italian, as I can see, very, very good. Again, set in Sicily, how it works. Yeah, a little bit over the top in some places, but the premise of it, very, very good. Again, deals with narcotics trade and how that all functioned. So listen, I could go on, but I've given you a couple of programs that you might want to watch over Christmas. Some that I would say, entertainment maybe, but not there. Some that, watch, and with great elements of realism as well. So that's what I'm trying to do to show you the realism. As I said, people ask me, what do I think is realistic? Those are the ones that I can say. One thing I should hit on. The premise of James Bond is actually if you look in the initial movie, the premise of it, how it functions or functioned in that era, probably hits about right. The concept, if you will, about how an officer is working, that a case officer, because James Bond is a case officer, so a case officer is working, that premise, yeah, not bad. And to be fair, that premise, so when I was in, hadn't changed. I was a case officer, and that premise is probably about right, about how he's going around trying to solve, or in a mission, or for that particular task, working with liaison, other countries' security or intelligence service or police, whatever that might be, and trying to bring it. The over-the-top bits are all the bits he goes with it. But the premise, this is an officer in the Secret Intelligence Service who goes externally to carry out a task. It's not a made-up organisation in reality, but he has a mega organisation that he deals with. Because I've been asked this, so I'm just putting this James Bond in the end. He has what they call thrush or whatever they are, these made-up bodies that he's dealing with, and Goldfinger and all this. Yeah, all that's rubbish. But if you look at the premise of how the functionality is there, the premise of the functionality of an officer, a case officer, dealing with issues, getting all the assistance he requires from all parts of the UK. It gets it wrong that it's something to do with the military. Look, SIS, MI6 is nothing to do with the United Kingdom military. It's a civilian organisation. It's nothing to do with the police. It's a civilian organisation, nothing to do with any of them. But you can get assistance from all of the bodies. And that's what he does very, very well. He gets assistance from all of the UK bodies to assist his way through. He gets assistance 9 times out of 10 from the CIA. Yep, again, there's a working together with the Central Intelligence Agency, often correct on issues. He gets assistance from other agencies in the country he's in, correct. He gets assistance via the embassy, correct. So there's a whole host of things that you can take off and say, correct, right? All that's correct. But the bits that are around it are over the top, right? So that's what I'd like to say based on James Bond. The bits around it are over the top, but the way it functions in its widest generality are roundabout correct. And the other thing that's correct is that obviously he is allowed to do things that you can't do or should not be doing as a citizen of the United Kingdom, because it's obviously illegal in somebody else's land. But it is correct, and I'm not telling you anything, that under the Intelligence Services Act, and when James Bond was written, there was no such act because MI6 did not exist when James Bond was written. It did not exist. It wasn't an organisation, right? It was there, but it was never, if you will, avowed as an organisation by the state of the United Kingdom. It's hardly avowed now, to be fair. But in those days, there wasn't such a thing. Now you've got, actually, and you can look it up, look it up on your computer even, you can see, what is the Intelligence Services Act of 1994 or something like that. And it will say that an officer can do things on behalf of Queen and country, external to the United Kingdom, and that will be authorised. Okay? So it's a license. I don't say it's a license to kill, but it is a license. So what I'm saying is so the widest parameter, if you will, want to look at the parameter of it, is correct. All the fluff that goes with it is nonsense. So I thought I should, because one particular person asked me about that, so I just want to make it very clear. Yeah, the fluff, nonsense. So that's why I'm saying some programs show that quite well, others go over the top and don't. So listen, I hope you've enjoyed today. If you want me to do this again on some other types of programs, please ask and I will do. If you want me to do this under a thruple with their questions, because they'll have questions that I can't even think about, just ask us and we'll bake that in, if you will. And then I can get questions from the ladies who I would never have thought of asking, because, I'm doing the role and they're not. And they may have things that come from left side that I wouldn't even have thought of. I'm just here giving you a feel as to what I think is good, because I've been asked from, people who've called in or written in. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. Hopefully you have enjoyed this look at the movies, look at TV. I didn't get onto radio and books, didn't have time. But yeah, these two things of the visual cinematography world and how it deals with policing, secret intelligence and national security. Hopefully you found it interesting, and I'll see you again next week.
Here is a working-class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.